Okay, welcome everyone to this workshop scheduled for 3 p.m. This is the budget workshop. Dr. Pace, if you want to commence.
Yes, Chairman, members of the board, thank you very much. This is our opportunity to share with you where we are, at least where we think we may be today as it relates to our budget for the 2020-2021 school year. Of course, as you know, there's quite a bit of uncertainty, not just because of COVID-19, but also because the legislature has not yet sent the state budget to the governor. And of course, that means he hasn't signed it or approved it for the upcoming fiscal year. Sarah and Jose are going to walk through some of the saving measures that we've put into place to get us to where we are to wrap up the 1920 budget, and then where we think we might be for the 2021 budget. And also, of course, at this opportunity to hear from the board about any specific priorities that you would want us to try to strategize to line up in the budget, or any concerns or things that you have that you might want to suggest we may not necessarily consider essential at this point in time. So I'm going to turn it over now to our Chief Finance Officer and Director of Budget, Sarah Graber and Jose Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, board members. So as Dr. Pace mentioned, the governor has not yet signed the state budget and our FEFP. So everything that we're going to be presenting today is based on the conference report or the first calculation as approved by the legislature back in March, pre-COVID. So we are hearing that we expect that this will ultimately end up being the budget signed by the governor in the coming weeks. So we are going to move forward with this at this time with the understanding and certainly the foresight that we expect a revenue shortfall as we continue to move throughout the year, and we will need to begin seriously planning for that. So I'm going to flip through the book if we want. Can we get it up on the screen? We'll pull that up real quick. And if we go to page I-2 is the budget timeline. The lines that are highlighted are lines that involve either board workshops, board meetings, or our required public hearings. So you can see today we are on the second highlighted line. We're here at June 2nd for our board workshop on general and capital funds. After this, we'll then reconvene again in a board meeting on July 14th to go over the entire budget with all funds and present that to the board prior to our first public hearing on July 28th, and then our second and final public hearing to adopt the budget and millage on September 8th. So, moving on, the next couple of pages go through the budget conventions as you're used to, and there have been no changes here. Page I-6 is the FTE historical and projected overview for the last 9 years. You can see we continue to grow here in Osceola County, which we're all aware of our exponential growth. You can see down at the bottom, we are projecting a 2.73% growth in FTE going into next year, and we do still remain just under 3% on average per year for our forecasting. And then the next 2 pages are a comparison of FTE broken down by school for where we ended the year to what we are projecting for next year. A couple of things I'll just point out. You'll see our elementary, traditional elementary schools in total are projected to go down 478 students or FTE. Part of that is due to the increase in the Family Empowerment Scholarship Program. We expect to lose some kids to the growth of that program, and a large number of those do tend to be new kindergartners entering the system. Middle school and high school are increasing as we would expect due to our growth. And then the multi-level schools, you'll see we've moved Canoe Creek into there, as that'll be becoming a traditional school as of July 1. So that has been moved into the multi-level category. And then on the next page, removed from our charter schools. So our charter schools in total were we're net down to 203 or 204 students. Some of that is the loss of Canoe Creek in the charter category, as well as Bella Lago Charter Academy's numbers have gone down due to redistricting that was previously approved. And then we also have the old Avant-Garde school removed and the new Victory charter in here. So, and again, I'll just point out the increased growth in the family empowerment as far as our projections. And then we have 560 FTE held back as undistributed. So overall growth of the 1893 in FTE. The next page, page I-9, is our tax millage and levy history. At the top, again, you can see the required local effort, or RLEs, going down to 3.774. That continues to decline in accordance with the RLE rollback policy. And then you can see the growth in the tax roll, up 8.5%, and the total tax levy projected to be up 4.71% for next year. Moving on to the next page, page I-10, is the comparison of the FEFP runs from the fourth calc where we ended this year to the, again, comparing to the conference report, which has not yet been approved by the governor. Couple of things I'll point out here. At the top, you see the change in FTE, again, by category, and the total 1893 that we just went through. Yeah. Line 15 is the base student allocation, or BSA. That is growing by $40. And then a couple of other things as we move down, you'll see on line 26 for student transportation, you see a decrease there, but we actually were able to increase our transportation revenue at the end of this year. So when that gets recalculated in the next run, we expect to see an increase there. So don't really look at that as a decrease. We do expect that to change. Line 29, digital classroom allocation. There is a reduction there. The legislature moved some money out of that category going into next year. And then 2 lines down, the mental health allocation, there was additional funding added there. So you'll see the bump of $653,000 to our mental health allocation. The next line right below it, line 32, funding compression allocation. We are very happy that we are going to continue to receive some funding through that allocation. And again, this one has to do with how much our district is below the state average in per student funding. The reason you see that number going down, the DCD, or district cost differential conversation that was being had ended up not passing this year. So we are sticking with the old formula for the Florida Price Level Index rather than moving to the wage index that was proposed. However, there was a hold harmless on the DCD that ended up being built into the funding compression allocation, which further diluted that pot of money. So that's why you see our share of that pot of money being diluted or reduced between this year and next year.
Sarah, is that number subject to veto by the governor or not?
No, I don't believe so. He would have to either sign or not sign the entire FEFP.
The entire budget. Okay,
yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. And then the last 2 lines in that section is the removal of the Best and Brightest program and the addition of the new Florida Classroom Teacher Compensation Program, where our district would receive $12.1 million. Again, to be shared with the charter schools would get their percentage of that. And then that entire pot of money would be allocated out in accordance with the statute on the new teacher compensation program. So that 12.1 comes off the top as we look at balancing our operational budget. And then down at the very bottom, line 53, this budget results in an increase in per student funding of $153, which is a 2.09% increase. So flipping to the next page.
Before you leave, Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Mr. Thacker, absolutely. The floor is yours. Just chime in with, so that we could keep the discussion organic, just chime in whatever you need to.
Okay, I'm just curious. We had Jim Hamilton in last year, and we talked about why we were 67 out of 67. And a lot of those numbers were, ESE and all those different things. It was, $20 here, $15 there. And when we looked at our neighboring counties, we were significantly out of whack with them. We were going to take a look at those and see if there were some things that we were not counting properly to see that we could move ourselves up. I'm not saying illegally, but I'm saying if we're not calculating the way every other county is, that's kind of our problem. We need to fix that. Did we do any looking into that, Sarah?
We did do some looking into the ESE area. We didn't find anything specific that we could implement immediately, but there is definitely room and more research to be done in that area. As far as some of the other categoricals, we are pretty much in line with our neighboring districts. In general, the Central Florida districts tend to be on the lower end of the ranking as far as per student funding, due to the fact that we don't receive sparsity, we don't have the high beachside property tax values, some of those other things that are contributing to either the small districts or the large districts. Central Florida really doesn't participate in. So there's another page in the booklet where you can kind of see the ranking, and you'll see that we are in line in most of the other areas with Central Florida.
Okay, thank you.
But yes, we are going to continue to look into the ESE and see if there's some opportunity there. So the next page, I-11, again shows some history of our total FEFP funding growth, as well as our per student funding growth. And the takeaway here is that while we do continue to grow, and our overall funding continues to grow due to our student growth size, the per student funding is not growing quite at the same rate. So the next page, page I-12, this is our total funding per student ranking. And I did want to point out, I noticed one thing that didn't get updated on this morning. At the very top, it says the 1920 second calculation. These are the numbers for the 2021 first calculation that this budget is based on. So just that top line just didn't get updated. But these numbers are for the first calc. And again, you can see we're at the bottom, 67 of 67, with per student funding of $7,499.91.
So what is driving Orange County to be $300 a student more than us from Jim Hamilton's analysis? Do you remember?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I know we can certainly go back and dig into that again.
Okay.
Some of it could have been ESE, but I don't think that was the primary reason. But yeah, Mr. Thacker, we can certainly go back and pull that stuff up again.
Okay. I'll pull it out too and take a look. That's fine.
Okay. The next couple of pages are the FEFP component descriptions. These have been updated, but again, most of them the same as you're used to seeing before. We have added on the last page, I-18, the new teacher salary increase allocation. So you can see the description there. And then moving on to the specifics of the general fund. What we have presented here on page 1-2 is kind of a high level summary of how we think we'll close out this year. So then where are we currently with the 1920 budget? So a couple things we want to talk through here. Due to COVID and shutting down schools for the fourth quarter, obviously there were some expenditures that were planned for that we ended up being able to avoid. So the first and the largest is we did experience some additional lapse for vacant positions of $2.9 million as our projection through June 30th. We do budget for lapse, but this would be additional on top of what was in the budget. The next line, you'll see substitutes, about $700,000 we think we would have spent in substitute costs in the fourth quarter had school been in session. So that's another cost avoidance. Next was utility savings. Again, we talked about this morning, savings on utilities is a major initiative in our strategic plan. And we were able to exceed what was budgeted this year. So another $500,000 there. The SROs for the sheriff's office, they were so generous to waive the cost when school was not in session this last quarter. So we were able to capture some savings there as well, which will roll into next year to help fund some of our additional security needs. Transportation overtime, we've also been working on trying to reduce that. And again, without buses rolling, we think we've avoided costs of about $400,000 in that area, as well as another $400,000 of fuel. And then our school discretionary adjustments, we also pulled some money back from the school non-salary budgets in this last quarter. Again, related to the fact that schools didn't need as many supplies, didn't have to fund substitutes. So there were some savings to be had in that area. And then lastly, on line items, several line items that ended up not being spent, mostly due to the shutdown period. So about $400,000 there. So in total, we think we've saved or avoided expending around $6.2 million in the current year's budget. I would love to say that we're able to have that fall to the bottom line and increase our reserves to roll forward to next year as we anticipate some funding shortfalls coming forward. However, as you guys are aware, we are also expecting a shortfall or deficit again this year in our health insurance trust fund as we really work to put our new program in place and turn that around. We are still in a deficit position at this point in time. And as we move forward, I haven't seen May's results yet. I expect them any day now. But as we get May's expenses and then June and year-end closeout, we think we're going to end up somewhere close to $6 million short. So the plan at this point, again, subject to your direction, would be that we take the money or the cost avoidance or savings and go ahead and shift that to cover the deficit in our health insurance trust fund as of this June 30th. And then the last line on here, the budgeted surplus, just a reminder that our approved budget for this year was to increase fund balance by 1.6 million, and this plan would still allow for that. So before we move on, I just wanted to ask, is there any feedback from the board, or are we good with this plan to close the year out?
Looks good to me.
Yeah, and just to confirm, obviously, I'm looking at the number, so it's just for my own thought process. Cost avoidance is 6.2, and we were also projected to be short 6 million. So the cost avoidance would, in essence, wash that. Okay, perfect.
That's our best projection at this time. Okay, so moving on to the next page, 1-3. This is a similar exercise, but going into what we're proposing for next year. So the starting point is really our increase in funding. And again, we've taken the FEFP increase in funding, backed out the teacher salary package, which will go directly to the teacher salaries and not available for our operational budget exercise. So that's been removed, as well as what we're projecting to go to charter schools, as well as family empowerment and McKay. Once we back those out, we have a 5.5 million actual increase in funding for our budget to operate our traditional schools. typically and that is primarily due to growth. So typically we would take that money, we would add additional instructional positions, additional teacher units to cover those additional students. However, we did go through and we got really tight on our allocations this year. As you know, we've kind of worked through that the last couple of years, but we thought there was still some additional room to get a little bit tighter. So we went ahead and did that. And by doing that, we were actually able to stay basically net in terms of instructional allocations, which resulted in the need to not spend that $5.5 million on new teacher positions. So that's part of what's really allowing us to be able to balance the budget for next year. In addition to that, we are projecting to reduce line items in the general fund budget by $2.4 million. The majority of that is still going to be incurred, but is being shifted to capital. So I know Dr. Pace briefly mentioned this morning, we did find out that we are able to fund some of our enterprise software licenses out of capital dollars. So some districts have been doing that for years now, and we decided that now's the time for us to go ahead and make that shift. So about 1.7 million of what would have been in our line items, we are shifting to capital and saving that money in the general fund, as well as we've cut some other line items too to get to that 2.4 savings. Utilities, while we've done a lot of savings in the utilities area this year, we do think there's still some additional room for more. We're going to implement an incentive program as well as some behavior modification initiatives, and we think that'll continue to get our utility costs down for next year. So we've gone ahead and forecasted an additional $200,000 in savings in that area. And then on the cost side, you may remember that there's an increase in our FRS rates for next year, which has been approved. So that's going to cost our district about $4.2 million. We've also gone ahead and held back some money for a potential proration. There's been a lot of talk about expecting a proration for next year. Originally, it was due to the increased student growth from Family Empowerment Program. But now with the revenue shortfalls that we're anticipating statewide, we're also expecting to see a decrease in funding sometime throughout the upcoming year. So we've gone ahead and put $1 million holdback in there for a potential proration. Also, I think I forgot to mention in the current year, we are currently at a proration of $990,000. So not unreasonable to expect that we'd see something like in that area again. We also had our previous FTE audit that resulted in around $200,000 that will be paid back at some point in the future. Again, we never quite know when DOE is going to take that funding back, so we do a holdback to account for that. And then the last two pieces are grants that we have where we have to fund a match portion. So the TSL grant, our match portion for the current year is $600,000. Again, we are still waiting for a final grant approval on that to ensure that we'll continue. It would be the 4th year of that grant. So hopefully we will get word that we are going to continue to receive the grant portion of that. Otherwise, it would be another $700,000 or so that the general fund would end up absorbing to continue with those teacher mentors. And then lastly, the SIG 4 grant match to be able to pay out the bonuses at Central Avenue that ended up not materializing. However, we did want to go ahead and move forward and cover those since they were promised to those individuals. That was in the neighborhood of $200,000. So we've gone ahead and funded those. And the net result is that we are presenting a budget here today that would have a $1.9 million surplus for next year and allow us to continue to maintain that fund balance percentage that we try to protect. So Any questions on that before we move on to some of the detail?
Dr. Pace?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Soto. Just real quickly, board members, I understand that in the past we have tried very hard to avoid having to make capital transfers to balance the operational budget. However, with the substantial FRS cost increase and wanting to absorb that without taking away from our fund balance reserve that, of course, as Sarah says, we've always wanted to protect, we have found that we could do the enterprise-wide software. So that's a part of the line item reduction that you see is that potential transfer of enterprise software. We talked about it this morning in our strategic plan goal 3, as well as it's presented here in the budget to help with that piece and cover that cost increase. And for the SIG Board Grant match, it's not a lot of money, but those were bonuses that were promised in a memorandum of understanding when Central Avenue was struggling to recover and get out of academic jeopardy. And Ms. Winston and the team have hired well, and those teachers have worked really, really hard to improve student outcomes at Central. And we felt like even though the state changed the rules for the SIG Board Grant, we felt like we had to honor that agreement. So that's kind of where we are to get to a balanced budget.
Thank you, Dr. Pace. I believe Mr. Weishire had wanted to share something.
Hey, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Dr. Pace, what you just mentioned about the SIG Board Grant, I think is an important thing. It goes back to the integrity of this board and the team that supports the work that happens in the district, and that we look to always fulfill and honor the promises that we make. And so I think it's just one more example of how we've always tried to make sure that we find that balance of doing what we know is right while also preserving as many resources as we can to ensure that the district is financially whole. So I'm in support of the presentation of where we stand and what we're looking to do.
All right, Mr. Booth?
Yes, can you?
Yes, sir.
With my Bluetooth deal?
Yes, sir.
SIG 4, is it? I thought we were talking about some federal dollars here, but these were state dollars, Dr. Pace?
Federal dollars, but the State Department of Education must approve our plan each year. And the plan that we submitted 3 years ago, they kind of changed the rules on us under new leadership in that particular area.
So what? Get to our employees. I mean, the state is now a recommitment, or how is this working?
We were still able to use the dollars, but they said that we could not use them for teacher bonuses. Remember, these were recruitment and retention bonuses when we reconstituted Central Avenue and had everybody reapply for their positions. So we were allowed to continue to use the dollars in the grant for things like professional learning and extended time. For example, when teachers would come and participate in the homework
Losing everybody,
diner,
I must be in.
they could earn extra contract time. So we could pay extra contract time, we could pay for professional learning, but we could not pay for bonuses. And we had committed to those in the MOU.
Is it next year? Or is this something we're going to have to negotiate next time? And by the way, I am in support of adding this to the budget and fulfilling this promise. I'm just talking about going forward.
Right. I believe this was the last year of the commitment, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I think I'm in a poor service area, so hopefully you can hear me. But
We heard you well, Mr. Booth. Ms. Graber, do you want to continue?
Sure. So let's move on to page 1-4 is our general fund budget summary. Again, same bottom line, but this will show you the breakdown of the major categories of revenue as well as the major categories of appropriations. Again, coming down to line 43 with that 1.9 million projected surplus. And then moving on to the next page, page 1-5 is what you're used to seeing as our long range forecast. However, given where we are today with the state of funding in Florida and the uncertainty, we have not even attempted to really project out past next year at this point. So what you see here is really our projection for 2020-21, which is what we're talking about with the 1.9 million surplus. And then you can see the ending fund balance by category and that financial condition ratio that will stay right around 9.5%. So the next page, page 1-6, is
Can
a
I-
little, yes,
Ms.
sorry,
Weaver?
go ahead, yes, Chairman Soto.
I just noticed Mr. Booth had his hand and he may want to refer to this chart before we continue forward. Mr. Booth, is that correct? Oh, never mind. That was just a holdover.
No.
That was just a holdover hand. But this is a chart that we are very, very familiar with, and so I just wanted to be on the safe side. Please continue, Ms. Graver.
Okay, so the next page, 1-6. Again, this is new. You are not used to seeing this one. So it's a little scary to look at, but we wanted to go ahead and get everybody to start thinking about what a potential reduction could look like. I know you're all hearing things in the news and coming out of Tallahassee about looking at it somewhere between a 10 to 30% reduction in sales tax revenues, which play a large part in the state budget. So while we haven't really gone through a full-blown budget cutting exercise quite yet, we definitely want to start thinking about what we would do if we were to take a substantial hit. So what we've shown here is a 10% reduction in our FEFP budget even would produce a shortfall of $55.8 million. And then we've also shown the CARES funding that's coming in. We have 14 million in there. I think our total that was released the other day was 15 million, with the reminder that that money will have to be shared with not only our charter schools, but all private schools within Osceola County as well, so that we get further diluted. But even with that additional CARES funding, you can see we're still substantially below what we're currently used to operating our district off of. So hopefully nothing this horrible will transpire, but it is certainly something that we need to keep at the forefront of our minds as we move forward and see what the legislature ends up doing to the K-12 education budget.
Ms. Castillo has a comment or question. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regards to the estimated funding for CARES, and I probably should know this, do we know what the formula would be to allocate that with the other schools? Is there like a formula as to how much of the pie we're giving them, or is that not something that has been put forth yet?
Yes, so the way that we will get the way that districts will get their allocation is based on the Title I formula, but then the way that we will disperse that to our individual charter and private schools will be based on student numbers. So anytime we have to disperse money, it's based on student numbers as a proportion of the overall county. And typically we are not used to having to divide that amongst all the private schools. So I believe we have 81 private schools here in Osceola County. So that will be a new exercise as well to coordinate and communicate and disperse funds to all of those.
Ms. Castillo, you still have another comment to make?
I apologize, I do not.
It's just that I don't want the charts to move if anyone wants to comment on them. Please proceed, Ms. Graver.
Okay, so the next couple of pages are the line item allocations. We've gone ahead and included here the budget for this year as a comparison, so you can see what's increasing and decreasing in our proposed budget for the upcoming year. And again, the net effect is a reduction of $2.4 million. You'll see on the second and third page, we've highlighted a couple. Those are the ones that we are proposing to shift, the enterprise software items that we are proposing to shift to capital funding source. So you can take a look through the detail. I know you guys usually like to look at this and then kind of get back with us one-on-one with any specific questions that you may have.
All right, continue.
Slide up for one more second.
Oh,
I'm just going through the lines.
all right, Ms. Graber, you could proceed.
Okay. Next is page 1-10, which is the SAI budget. So again, you can see here how we're proposing on using those dollars. And I don't think anything in particular to point out. Dr. Pace, I don't know if there's anything specific that you wanted to mention within SAI. And then the following page is the breakdown of the reading allocation funding. And with that,
I would stop for just a moment if you don't mind, Chairman Soto.
Absolutely.
You know, one of the programs that we were unable to do this spring, board members, was our spring swimming program. And that is something that we have not allocated funds to continue next year in the fall or the spring. As you know, it's become more and more challenging to, number one, secure use of the pools. Number two, secure busing transportation so that we can get all of our kindergarten and first graders to the pool in order to provide swimming. And it takes about 2 weeks away from instruction. I know this has always been a program that's been highly valued by our board and by our community, but with funds being as limited as they are and also time being as limited as they are, and then you take into account the also complications that would potentially come up with COVID-19 and a swim lesson, we felt like that was something that we would take out of the budget at this time, but I certainly would welcome any feedback if that's not the direction that the board would want to go. That is on page 1-10 or I-10 as a part of our SAI budget where we have zeroed out the funding.
Board, any feedback or comments before we move on? Very well.
Thank you.
Ms. Graber?
okay, so I think that brings us to the capital projects fund. Page 2-2 is just a summary. So if we go ahead and move forward to 2-3, we'll dig into the capacity budget, which again is our impact fees. So in the revenue section, I'll just go ahead and share with you that we have received over 70 or projecting to receive over 70 million in impact fees again this year. So they continue to roll in. However, we don't want to estimate too high on a ongoing basis. So through some discussions with our business advisory board, we have decided to set our forecast for next year back down to 50 million. So that you'll see that at the top there, that's what this is based on. So we don't want to move forward assuming we're going to have more revenue come in and then see impact fees start to dry up. So we continue to look at this every month with the business advisory board, and we'll adjust accordingly as we move through the year. But the three main new school projects that are included in this budget are 3 K-8 schools. K-8AA in the Kindred site, and that would be proposed to open in August of 2022. We then know that we need a K-8 in the West Side area for relief, and that would also be proposed to open in August of 2022, assuming we can get a site to build on. And then lastly, we've added a third K-8CC in the East St. Cloud area that would be projected to open the following year. So again, working on some land sites for these schools, but these will be the projected upcoming schools in our 5-year plan at this point.
Ms. Graber, I'd like to allow Mr. Thacker to make a comment or a question.
Yeah, I'm just curious. The 70 to a $50 million drop. What, I mean, because there's still a lot of projects in the pipeline, a lot of stuff going on. Where are they? What is their rationale for a drop that big?
So we were running 2 years ago, we were running closer to 50 million. And then the year before this, we saw a big increase when we went through our last impact fee study and continue to see the new growth boom come into place. So we kind of expected that big increase last year, but didn't expect it to continue on forever. If you also remember, we had gone from CO'd back to permit. So there was about a 6-month period where we really thought that the jump in our revenues were attributable to that as well. So we were trying to be conservative to make sure that we didn't just see this increase in revenue and assume that it was going to continue on forever. This year kind of surprised us a little bit as well, that as we've moved through this year, we've just continued to see revenue coming in above what we had forecasted. So it may be reasonable to expect that, some of that will continue. 50 million maybe a little low, but again, as we kind of see what transpires over the next few months, and especially with the times we're going through right now and all the uncertainty, the business advisory members felt like that was a comfortable place to kind of set it for right now. And then again, we can always adjust it upward.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Graber, you could continue.
All right, so that covers the capacity portion of the capital budget. And then the next page is everything else, so our non-capacity building. And again, you guys are used to seeing most of these categories. A couple of things we did with our revenue projections, and again, a lot of uncertainty in the sales tax area right now. We went ahead and reduced our sales tax revenue projection for next year by 10%. Again, we'll kind of continue to monitor that and see what comes out, what forecasts come out as well, and what we expect in that area. But we did want to go ahead and at least acknowledge that we do expect to take a hit there temporarily. Let's see, a couple of things that we added. We've continued with most of our typical funding formulas for athletics, buses, the capital transfers, safety and security, technology infrastructure, and student computers. The area that we did increase substantially was the technology area. As we mentioned, we shifted some of that funding out of the general fund into capital. So you will see an increase there. We increased the student computer budget this year, in the current year. So we've held that steady for right now. Obviously, as we have additional board discussion about what we want to do going forward, we can talk about if that's an area that we want to prioritize additional capital funding, or if we want to look to potentially CARES funding or shifting other grants, and exactly what we want to do in that area of additional computers. So we'll await direction from the board on that. We, under renovation and remodeling, the second line down, maintenance and renovation deferred maintenance, that is our sales tax dollars that we're putting towards our facility condition assessment list and all of the deferred maintenance. Maintenance has been running about $6 million a year. However, the reason you'll see a reduction there right now is we actually increased, but in order to get a jump start on a lot of the summer projects, we fronted some of what would have been next year's budget into this year to go ahead and allow for those projects to get started while the schools were shut down. So that's a good thing. So there is more deferred maintenance work getting done, but we actually were able to shift some of that funding into the current year to go ahead and get that jump start.
Yes, Mr. Thacker.
Yeah, Sarah, this morning when we had the strategic plan update, there's roughly 17,500 computers that we've let out. Are we taking into account we probably may not see some of those again?
We are, there's nothing specifically accounted for in the budget related to that. But we do absolutely assume that, you know, we won't get 100% of those back, and a certain percentage of the ones we do get back will have damage.
All right.
And again, we will probably code some of that to the CARES funding once we get that, that is specific to the COVID shutdown.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, thank you.
Dr. Pace?
Yes, just in response to that as well, Mr. Thacker, we shifted our Title I roll forward dollars from what had been planned for some summer professional learning and summer extended learning for students and staff members to buying additional devices. They're the last 2 months of the school year. So that accounts for some of the 17,000 devices that were issued.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Ms. Graber?
Okay, I think that covers this page unless there's any other questions. All the carry forward projects are listed at the bottom, but those that were currently funded this year or previously, as well as our comprehensive renovations, which we continue to close out with Denjon and St. Cloud Middle School. I guess I should point out we just received our custody back on Gateway High School last week. That is not yet incorporated into the budget. We'll be talking to you all further at an upcoming facilities workshop about that project specifically, and starting to formalize the scope and the budget for that. And then once we get to that point, we would be looking at most likely additional sales tax bonding as we move forward with our comprehensive renovation program.
Thank you.
So while we certainly plan to do that within this 5-year plan, it is not formally incorporated at this time.
All right. Thank you. I'd like to give Ms. Castillo a chance here to chime in. Ms. Castillo, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Sarah, you mentioned that we did increase our spending on student computers, and that we may have to, this is what I heard, so correct me if I'm wrong, we may have to make use of some grants. Do we have any specific grants in mind for that?
Well, I was referring to, as Dr. Pace mentioned, we did use some Title I roll forward dollars
Okay.
this year for that. So some of that could potentially continue if we wanted to shift some of our title dollars into computers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Castillo. Dr. Pace, or?
Yes, I just did want to again point out to the board that as a part of our carry forward this year, we have a couple of things that we've mentioned to you, but I wanted to again bring to your attention. Number one, we are planning to do some reconfiguration and mild renovation at the St. Cloud Middle School band building property. It's that piece that sits out in front of the round building that we would turn into a site and an office and facility space for the growth of Osceola Virtual School, moving it out of Jeffries. We also are hoping to continue with an OTEC welding project. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to locate that at the St. Cloud site, but we do believe that we have land and are looking currently for a metal building structure that we could put at the Simpson Road campus, because we did receive grant funding to buy equipment to get a welding program and apprenticeship program started. And then finally, we are continuing to aggressively look for a west side transportation location and have some dollars set aside in carry forward to start planning and design for a metal building structure to try to help us with that. It would just provide not only additional relief, because we have clearly outgrown the Horizon Middle School bus transportation site, but also to provide some pretty significant operational savings in terms of windshield time, maintenance, and all those types of things for transportation if we could get something a little further out on the west side. So still kind of trying to keep those projects moving forward. I wanted to make sure that was on your mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pace. Terry, do you still have something else? No. All right, Ms. Graber, you may continue.
Okay, so the next several pages are just detail of some of the lines and budgets that we just talked about in the two-page capital plan. So safety and security carryover funds, this will show you what's already in this year's budget that just hasn't been spent yet and where those dollars are allocated. And then the next page is the safety and security area. We've budgeted an additional $1 million for next year, so that'll show you the breakdown of where we plan to spend those dollars, with about half of that going towards lobby modifications. We are working through secure lobbies at all of our sites. Next is the technology area. So again, the first page is the carryover breakdown, and then the next page, 2-8, is the new budget for technology. Again, this is where you'll see the top section. Some of those enterprise items are what was shifted out of the general fund. And I'll also mention down a little ways under the media area, we have gone ahead and added funding this year for additional smart boards, the interactive flat panels, as well as projector refresh of close to $1.3 million. So those are some areas that we've kind of held off on funding the last few years, but it is important to go ahead and allocate those dollars to get our technology up to speed. And then the next couple of pages are our cyclical capital. First, the carryover. You can see projects that are currently planned for and just unspent at this point in time. And a lot of this work is currently being done and will be done throughout the summer. And then on page 2-11 is our new budget, $4 million for next year's allocation in the cyclical capital. And you can see the last line on there is the contingency or reserve of $2.8 million. The reason that's sitting there is we do continue to approve these projects as we move throughout the year. So as requests come in, we use that contingency budget to go ahead and move forward with projects that are requested throughout the year. And the next two pages are the deferred maintenance budget. Again, the carryover breakdown, and then the new items on page 2-14. And again, you'll see that the new budget is $4.5 million, but there was another couple million as well that we went ahead and fronted to get summer work done. So continuing to prioritize our sales tax dollars in that area. Moving on, page 2-15 is our debt capacity analysis related specifically to the capital outlay millage. So this is our property tax or ad valorem dollars. And this walks you through how much of those dollars are currently tied up in debt funding or debt obligations from prior issues. To see the first column as of 2021, at the very bottom, 35.7% of the dollars that we're projecting to bring in through our 1.5 mil capital outlay millage is obligated for debt service payments from prior COPS issues. So that's what this schedule is showing. And then you can see for the 5 years going forward, as we continue to make those annual debt service payments, you'll see that percentage go down. And lastly, the last two pages, 2-16, 2-17, is our future debt payment detail. So you can see column by column each one of our debt issues, and then the payment schedule by year for each of those. So on the last page, you'll see our total principal amount outstanding as of this June 30th will be $251 million, and then with interest, $287 million. So that's our debt service plan as of now. Again, just looking forward, we're not currently looking at any COPS issues in the near future, but we will be looking at a potential sales tax bond issue once we figure out what exactly we're doing with the Gateway Comprehensive renovation, as well as the timing of that project.
Thank you, Ms. Graber. Just giving an opportunity for anyone, any board member or Dr. Pace to add anything to this discussion? All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the presentation. Mr. Thacker?
Sarah and Jose and your team, as always, very nice job. It's easy to follow, easy to understand. I've got some questions. I've got a lot of questions actually, but I will catch up with you and Jose one-on-one so we don't have to bog this thing down. So you can explain some things to me.
Sounds great. Let's let us know when you're available.
And that was one of the things some chairman said I was going to offer to all of the board members. If you'd like to have individual discussions with Sarah and Jose, with Sarah and me and Jose, we are certainly willing to schedule those between now and our next budget workshop in July. Also at the same time, I've tasked the team since our workshop this morning on the strategic plan to look back at our strategy profiles and to make any tweaks or recommendations for suggestions that they might have about that so that we can bring both tentative budgets and tentative strategic plan for 21 or for 2021 to you at that same time in July and August. And so certainly if you have individual feedback that you'd like to share with me or me and any members of the team, happy to make those arrangements to have those individual conversations. Your feedback, your guidance are both welcomed and appreciated and certainly very necessary to keep us on the right page. So thank you all for your attention today.
Thank you, Dr. Pace. I'm going to go ahead and Mr. Booth wants to make a comment.
Yes, if everybody can hear me, I just wanted to thank the whole team for all the hard work, and I'll certainly reach out to Sarah and Jose with the questions that I have. What I would like to request, though, on a lighter note, is I'm sitting here, and instead of time, I need a like button. You know, maybe Terry and I we could use this better than anybody else because we might understand the social media. Tim's pretty good at it too, but I need a like button every time Dr. Pace says something I like. I want to press a button, you know. But anyway,
you've narrowed it down to just me that doesn't know what you're talking about. That's okay.
No, I didn't include Kelvin either. So. But actually,
if we do a like button, we might need a dislike button too, though.
No, I'm on Facebook and no dislike buttons. But no. On a serious note, just to finish up, thank you, team. Sarah, you guys do an amazing job every year, you know, that I've been working with you, and I appreciate it. And Dr. Pace and your team, and this is again, you know, I said it earlier at the first workshop today, but this is really one of the most important things that we do, if not the most important thing we do as school board members. So thank you all for working so hard on the community's behalf.
Well, thank you for all of the board support. And I also don't want to miss this opportunity to thank Jose and the rest of our budget team. They really do all the hard work to bring this all together and make it balanced and present it in an easy, understandable format. So great job to my team as well.
Thank you, Ms. Graber. Clarence, the floor is yours. He might have just had his hand. But yes, I think everybody here.
Yeah, I didn't take it down. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Yes, I believe that the board is very pleased with the presentation. I've always enjoyed how clearly you and your team is able to convey very, very complicated information with great detail. And I've always have enjoyed the opportunity to meet with you individually and with the superintendent for further clarification, which is usually required. Yeah, but like I said, just because you make it easy doesn't mean it is easy. Thank you very much. Any final comments before I adjourn this workshop? We will be meeting again in about an hour and a half. All right, I don't see anything, anyone with their hands up, so I'll go ahead and adjourn this workshop. Thank you very much.